Hello, you lovely cups. Welcome back to another What If. Today we're doing What If Tanjiro was a villain. Now, this is a new What If on the channel, obviously, and as you can probably see, as about is to happen, there's no new intro yet. So what happened is my intro actually got corrupted, and I didn't save it, which is my fault. So I have to remake it again, which is kind of sad, but yeah, that's about it. New intro will eventually be done. I guess it'll be somewhere this week where I'll have to fix it again, but the problem is I have school again, so yay. Anyway, this is a scriptless what if, so if I make mistakes, do just try to ignore them. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into it.
Yeah, you better listen. I'm bringing heat. You'll be a fan when I start rapping. Way I'll have your fucking head spinning. I'm known as spit vicious. Release bombs and go tick tick. Boom, you blow me that head missing. I'm a phenomenon. Stacking cheese like it's Parmesan. 8 different flows, call me Octomom. I'm moving fast like the Autobahn. And I'm independent, so I'm not your fucking starving like it's Ramadan. Sick, twisted, gifted. Can't copy, printed. Can't hold me down. I shape shift, I'm liquid. I killed this beat. I might get convicted. They know how I move.
Tanjiro would grow up to be very fond of his family. He'd be very close to them to the point where he would always protect them from anything, even if it just was his mother yelling at his younger brother because he did something wrong, and vice versa. Now, he did always take the blame for his siblings' wrongdoings. He always tried to be the good big brother that he is, and he'd always work hard as well. He'd never do anything half-heartedly. So he'd always be very committed to anything he did. So if he went to go down to sell some charcoal, he'd sell all the pieces before he came back up the mountain. That's just how Tanjiro was. Lots of people acknowledged him for this, and they actually kind of found it amazing that, such a young boy would do this for his family. He often got asked to help around in villages, or even villages further away, because they just heard of how amazing this boy was, and he got quite a bit of fame because of him just being a hard-working, helping boy. Of course, this attracted the attention of people with bad intentions, but most of the time they always got scared because of his father, of Tanjiro's father. Because his father was strong enough to even fight a bear, even in his sick years, so every samurai or any person who wanted to do his family harm for no reason at all, they'd be scared off. And Tanjiro, he would actually also train just to be as strong as his dad, because he wants to protect his family. He'd always go in the woods and he'd have this stick, or he'd pick up a stick and then he'd practice with it. Just some stupid little training that a kid would do. And his father would also always tell him to breathe and stuff like that, and he did. He always took the breath that his father taught him because he felt like it just made it easier to do actions that would otherwise require more strength. Anyway, Tanjiro would continue with a routine every day. He'd wake up, help his mom prepare breakfast, help his siblings out, and then after all of that, he would go down to the woods, chop down some trees, and then he would burn the trees in their coal, or in their log burner, get some charcoal, and then go down the mountain, sell it to the villagers, and then go up the mountain and share the spoils with his family, the spoils being money. Eventually, Tanjiro's father would pass, which was a quite sad moment for the family, and the boy felt quite taken aback by this because he was very close to all of his family members and his father, and he kind of got these dark thoughts of how could a person like that, who's so kind and who's so caring for his family, how could a person like that be taken away from us? But the boy, he got over it. Those dark thoughts, they remained forever, but he had to show that he was the one for his family, to protect them. He needed to be their shield and their anchor point so that they wouldn't lose what they had. So he would work double time, everything he did. He would overclock. He would be so tired sometimes that he would sleep an entire day after like 2 weeks of just nonstop work. There were nights where he wouldn't sleep at all, where he'd just keep working. This kid, in other people's eyes, he was even more determined as he already was, and that kind of spread all around. And eventually, this this person came up to their house, and he invited Tanjiro to be part of something called the Demon Slayer Corps, because they heard of how hardworking he is and how fast he did everything. So they were like, maybe that person could help us fight the demons. And he was trying to explain everything to Tanjiro, and he was explaining that demons existed and all of that. And Tanjiro, he declined the entire invitation. This man that he declined it from, having blonde hair with yellow ends, and he'd have this big smile on his face. Now this was obviously Kyojiro Rengoku, and he did introduce himself to the Kamado family. Now he was quite sad that Tanjiro didn't want to join, because he heard all of these great things of this boy, and he thought, this boy is a hardworking person. He's determined, and he wanted him in the Demon Slayer Corps because he felt like the boy had potential. But sadly, Tanjiro denied it because he just doesn't have time. He needs to care for his family 24/7. It's his family first and foremost. Now, Kyojuro did have a lot of respect for this, and he did leave after staying a night with the Kamado family. Tanjiro had invited him to stay over, and he realized how happy this family was, and it made him glad that he saw this. Now, Tanjiro, he would continue to work, but he'd be at the coal burner or at the log burner so much to get charcoal that his sense of smell actually dulled. He had always a great sense of smell, but now it kind of became normal. I guess you could say he couldn't really differentiate smells anymore, and it made him sad that he lost that. He didn't know why, but it made him sad. But at the same time, he just felt like he had to keep that kind of normality. And it's now that Tanjiro realized that, he is not, anything special compared to, like, even that guy he saw, because that guy was always happy, and he had this strong aura on him, and he felt that, those people, they are meant for great things, but Tanjiro, he's just a person meant to help his family. He really thought about it so much, he thought about so many things that night as well. He thought, oh, my father, he would have want me to do this and that, and Tanjiro, he decided to continue doing that things. Now, winter would befall the young boy after, he's 13 years old, and he decided to not do the Hinokami Kagura dance because he doesn't really want to do the Hinokami Kagura dance anymore. He just feels like it hurts him too much because every time he does the dance, he thinks of his father. So he decides instead he'll make it up to the fire god by going down to the village, selling quite a bit of charcoal, selling more than usual, and then hoping that he can make enough to please the fire god and also maybe get his sister a new kimono dress. So Tanjiro, he sets out down to the village, having a hard time leaving his family behind because he's kind of scared for them. But he goes down and he helps the people as he always does. He helps a boy out of trouble because he did take a sniff of the vase. Now, he could smell like a little remnant of like cat, but he couldn't really he didn't know for sure, but he then said that, the cat did it, and, everybody trusts Tanjiro there. So they end up, figuring out it's the cat, that the boy is fine. They continue on, and, Tanjiro continues selling charcoal, helping people out, and night falls, and he decides to stay in the village. Well, he doesn't decide that, but an elder actually tells him that he should not wander around in the woods at night. And so he does. He stays, in the village, and this time he's actually quite happy. I don't know, he feels like he finally did something for his sister because he hadn't been able to get her a new dress for so long. So he went to bed happy, and then the next morning he'd set out again. And he'd set up and he'd go up to the mountain and he'd find his family and he'd find his sister outside, and his sister is all bloodied up with his younger brother Rokuta under her, but sadly he's already dead. He looks inside and he sees all the dead people, and he takes a sniff and he can smell this smell, but he doesn't know for certain what it is. He can't differentiate it again. And then he decides, I need to go down the mountain with my sister, and he goes down the mountain. And he has Nezuko on his back, and he's running down the mountain, and then Nezuko starts squirming around on his back, and he falls down the side of the mountain. He stands up after falling because the snow did cushion his blow, and he looks around and he sees his sister's silhouette. And he's wondering what's wrong, and then she attacks him. And she has him pinned down, and has his axe between her teeth, and then she starts crying after he said some meaningful words to her. And in that instant he can smell something, or he thinks he can smell something, and he grabs his sister and dodges. As he looks up, he sees this boy with blue hair and blue eyes, who then yells at him for protecting a demon. And Tanjiro is so confused, he just wants to know what's happening. His family that he was so close to, they died, and then the boy, he tells Tanjiro to stop protecting the demon, but Tanjiro still protects his sister, and then he stands up and he has his axe and he rushes at the boy after he tells him to fight. And he ends up losing, but the boy is impressed by Tanjiro's skill, but then he sees that Nezuko protects him. And then he has this choice to make. Now, does he finish off the demon like he's supposed to, or does he let them live? And the boy, he's thinking so much, and then he says it's better that, he doesn't, know that he doesn't feel the pain of losing someone like that, because even if I don't kill his sister, another demon slayer might. And he finishes off Nezuko as she ends up disintegrating on the spot. He then leaves Tanjiro laying there. As Tanjiro wakes up, he finds his sister's kimono with ash dust in it. As he ends up just crying because he doesn't know what happened and he just wants his family back. He realizes that the boy probably killed his sister and then burned her body, although he doesn't understand why the kimono is still there. As he then proceeds to, grab her kimono, go back up to where his house is, and he buries his family. And he sits there, and he waits. And he starts crying, and he can't stop crying. He wants to stop, but he can't. And he sits there and he keeps on thinking, why us? Why us? Why did we deserve to go through that? What did we ever do to you people? He thinks and he realizes maybe that scent he got was that man killing his family. And he just sobs, and for 2 days he sits there. Just didn't eat anything, and then this family friend of his comes up the mountain and asks what happened, and Tanjiro explains everything that he knows, or at least, and the man gives his condolences and gives Tanjiro some onigiri to eat, which he does, and then the man leaves. Now Tanjiro, he keeps sitting there and he's thinking, and he's thinking, and he's thinking, and he's thinking all these dark thoughts. He can't get anywhere else in his mind right now. He can't see anything else. He's thinking, what are demons? Aren't you people the bad people for taking these people's away? Like, taking these people's lives? Like, why are you doing the things you do? Maybe there's demons who didn't ask to become a demon, who just want to live a normal life. Why do you have to kill that person? Because maybe those people were just happy. And he's thinking all of these things, and then he's saying these out loud, and it's nighttime, and then he hears a voice behind him. I see that they also took your family. A kind voice would speak. Now Tanjiro would turn around and he'd see this man with a hat who has these red eyes, and he's explaining that he also became a demon. And he says, I was also living with my family, and then one day when we were just eating food, this guy with a sword came inside and slaughtered them all. And Tanjiro was just sitting there questioning everything around him. He didn't want this to be reality. He wanted to be just happy. He just wanted a normal life. Not this crazy stuff. He wasn't made for this. And then the man, he says, and then I became a demon. And that's why they were chasing me, because I was a demon. But I didn't choose to be a demon. The man says, obviously, we know that this was a lie, but Tanjiro, to him, he's crying because he shows sympathy for this person, and this person sits down next to Tanjiro and they sob for his family together, and then he says, how about you become a demon too? We'll get revenge on them together. Now Tanjiro, he isn't thinking straight, and he decides, of course, that this is the only way he can ever get his family to actually live on in the afterlife without any regrets or without anything holding them back. As he says, yes, I'd love that. And then the man, he puts his nails into Tanjiro's arm, as Tanjiro can feel the man's blood coursing through his veins, or at least that's the feeling he thinks he's feeling. As he lays there and, he's feeling the change in his body, and the man says, grow stronger, and then one day beat the man who killed your parents, as he then proceeds to leave. Tanjiro, he goes inside, and then he just feels the change. And then 2 nights or so pass. He doesn't know, he wasn't awake, or he felt awake, but he wasn't. As he then looks down at his hands, he sees claws, and he feels this pain on his forehead, and he looks in the mirror, and there's this mark. There's a mark on the left side of his head, and it goes all the way down to his nose, and there's another one that's on his neck, and it also almost meets up to the middle. And he looks at himself and he's questioning what's happening. And then he remembers so many things, and he wants to go outside, but then he almost steps out, and then all of a sudden, by instinct, he jumps back. He's afraid of the sun, as he then proceeds to put a finger out in the sunlight, and it starts to burn, and it hurts him, and he's just looking at it like, what the hell is happening to me? And then it heals, and he's just confused, and he proceeds to try to figure out what's changing with his body. So for a week or so, he's just sitting there, changing, looking at what's changed in his body. And then at night, he goes outside and he looked around. Now, he started craving flesh, but Tanjiro, he didn't want to harm any humans. He was against that, so he wouldn't eat any humans, as he then just walked through the forest trying to find what's happened. And then he sees this man with a sword, a demon slayer, just standing there, back turned to him. As the demon slayer then turns around and sees Tanjiro, he rushes at Tanjiro at great speed, and Tanjiro, he's a bit taken aback, but then all of a sudden, by almost instinct, he decapitates the man by just swiping his arm. And he looks at the strength he has gotten, and he's just standing there like, what? And then he sees the blood, and he doesn't want to take it, but he grabs the man's sword, and he sheaths it, as he thinks that this might make him stronger. Now, the sword, it didn't change color. And it didn't have a color. It was just almost like a normal blade, at least that's what Tanjiro thought, but when he grabbed the sword, he could almost feel like if he just trained with it, it would change. He didn't know why, but he felt that way, and then he decided to just go to a place, to a cave actually, a cave that he had gone to as a child, where there used to live bears, as he went there and he killed the bears living there. And he would, skin them and he'd get their food and then he could live there for a bit. And he decided to train there for a few months. Now months would go by and then he would gain these sword skills. Now he'd remember this dance that his father told him, the Hinokami Kagura, and he felt like it was more than just a dance as he tried to do the moves with his sword. Now he'd take a breath and then he'd see these kind of, in his mind he'd see this imagination that there was like this flame on his sword, and he'd practice that for a few months, eventually getting so good at the sword skills that his blade turned black. But it wasn't a normal blade, it had this pattern of the sun there, but it wasn't a normal sun. It was like almost a sun that was an eclipse, when the moon is in front of the sun. And Tanjiro, he just was confused by all of this, and then he heard a voice behind him. Turning around, he'd see this person with 6 eyes as he said, "That's quite impressive, boy. How about you come study under me?" Now this man had a sword that looked weird, it has eyes on it, and he would look at this man and he'd be like, "Are you a demon?" He's like, "We're both demons. Now, I want you as my apprentice," he'd say as he'd, invite Tanjiro over. Now Tanjiro, not knowing anything and just needing to become stronger to survive at this point, because he was definitely going to get hunted by people, decided that he should probably follow this man, as he introduces himself as Tanjiro Kamado, and the man introduces himself as Kokoshibo. He follows the man, and the man asks him to eventually show him his sword moves. Now Tanjiro does, and the man recognizes these moves, and he says, "You are a sun breath user. How intriguing." The man would say as he'd never heard of a demon who could use the sun breath, and Tanjiro explained that he just did the dance that his father passed down, and Kokoshibo decided to, it's fine. This person can be my student, and they decided to train. So Tanjiro trained with Kokoshibo, and 2 or so years would almost pass. In this time, Tanjiro had learned basically everything there's to know about moon breathing. He had learned how to use his blood demon art, and he had learned most of Hinokami Kagura. He had already become an Upper Moon demon. He had become Upper Moon 6, and the previous Upper Moon 6 had become a kind of reverse or reserve Upper Moon. He'd actually become like Upper Moon 7, because he's strong enough to be an Upper Moon, but he's not weak enough to be a Lower Moon. So he had become Upper Moon 7, the first one to be a reserve. Now, Tanjiro is quite close with his demon brethren, because they felt like they could just, be friends. He'd always spar with Akaza, because they were about equal strength. Even though Tanjiro was Upper Moon 6, that just meant he had less Muzan blood in him, but he was still able to keep up with Akaza, and he'd be able to fight even Doma from time to time, but he was nowhere near Kokoshibo or even Muzan. And then he'd fight Gyutaro as well, because they became quite close friends, him sympathizing with Gyutaro and Gyutaro sympathizing with him. Now, they'd keep everything a secret from Tanjiro. They wouldn't tell him that they are actually the one that killed his family. They wouldn't explain all of that. Now, Muzan decided it was time for Tanjiro to kill some Hashira, because he had become an Upper Moon, but he didn't have a single human kill besides the one Demon Slayer on his name. And then he set out Tanjiro to a mission to kill a Hashira. Now he wouldn't know where to find a Hashira, so he'd first have to kill some Demon Slayers and lure a Hashira out, or at least that's what Muzan told him. Now, he'd always feel uneasy taking a human life. It's like something so precious, how can you take that? Now, he'd set out, and he would eventually be met by this boy with yellow hair. Now that is where I'm gonna end part 1. I know this what if is a bit weird and it's a bit scrambled all over the place, but I can't reveal everything yet because that's gonna be for the later parts. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe as always. If you're new around here, do that as well. If you like my content, of course, otherwise you're not obliged. Anyway, do comment down below what you thought of it, because this is a what if that I didn't script, so it's scriptless. Anyway, with that out of the way, join the Discord if you haven't already. I'm the Dragon Lord, and I'm signing out.
Tell me a story.
There was once a pale man with dark hair who was very lonely.
Why was it lonely?
All things must meet this man, so they shunned him.
Did he chase them all?
He took an axe and split himself in two, right down the middle.
So he would always have a friend.
So he would always